Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Moms Like Me, powered by Support Now, where we talk about all things support during different types of major life moments. This conversation will be a great one. We're talking today with a wonderful mom of three, Maggie Lawrence, who has had a couple of occurrences recently with major life moments. But one of the first ones we'll talk about today, I know a lot of people can relate to, which is a caregiving of a parent. I have witnessed firsthand, or I guess secondhand technically, the love and the support of Maggie's dad, Bobby. So I'd love to start the conversation today with you, Maggie, sharing a little bit more about your dad and kind of what led you to this role of taking care of him and providing support.
My dad is honestly my biggest hero. He always has been. And last February, really kind of started in January. Well, he got diagnosed with the COVID and he just didn't seem to get well. And he thought that he had long COVID. Ultimately, he had some symptoms that were concerning to prompt some lab work. And the lab work was concerning, and that prompted a very quick CT scan, which revealed that he had pancreatic cancer, or at least a tumor on his pancreas, which very much so looked like pancreatic cancer. And I happened to be in healthcare, so it was dangerous enough to just know a little bit about that particular beast. And you never want to hear cancer, but you definitely don't want to hear pancreatic cancer. And I live in Alabama. My parents live in Atlanta, and I couldn't get there quick enough. Anyway, his journey was long. He happened to have the best case scenario of the worst case kind of cancer. And as of right now, we have a very, very happy ending, really. But during that process, we really needed to get the word out about what was going on with him. And my cousin works at Children's in Atlanta and in the Aflac Center. And she said, Maggie, you really need to use Support Now. And I had never heard of it. And so I looked into it. And honestly, it was such an amazing way for us to get support, to give news. The audience that I was spreading the most of the news with was an older generation. It's my parents' generation. And even people older than them. My grandfather is 99 years old and still alive. He has an iPhone. I was able to send a link directly to all of these people that this is the newest update. And they didn't have to remember what's my email and what's my username and what's my password, which is, not only difficult for certain generations, but it's scary to them. They're putting all their information out there and they think someone's going to hack all their stuff. So it was a very user-friendly way for us to just disseminate the information one time, which also took the burden off my mom as really the primary caregiver by his side. I was there. I was, it's a couple states away. So,
Maggie, talk to me a little bit about, I think so often people, when they think of support, they think of cash and casseroles. In your situation, given the network and the community that your family has, it sounds like just the power of updates was significant enough. I'd love for you to just share a little bit more about, you touched on it just now around the idea of making it easy to disseminate information. But one of the things I was struck by in the experience that I've read is how you utilize your words. Tell me a little bit more about how you decided to curate updates, because you did such an amazing job of keeping updates interesting and, dare I say, fun. Like, I always, as a total stranger to your family, I always enjoyed reading your updates, even though I knew your dad was going through a really, really difficult stretch. And so I'd love for you to touch on just your approach to providing updates, because I think it's really great advice for someone that finds themselves in a similar position.
First of all, to know my dad is to love my dad, and he is one of the best storytellers, and he often communicates with just like storytelling or analogies. He loves humor. And right as he was diagnosed, he had just decided to be a volunteer baseball coach. He used to be a real baseball coach at the high school Westland where I grew up. And then that was just something he did for fun. And then they asked him to come back and kind of be a volunteer coach. And he had just started forming connections with these baseball players right when he got this diagnosis, and he had to back out. He's always been like a coach figure, like an actual coach, but also just kind of a life coach. He just like has the best wisdom for all people, for all situations, and people just gravitate towards him. So the first update I wrote, I sent it to my family before I actually posted it on Support Now. And a couple people were like, that just seems too informal and too funny. And this is like a very serious thing. And I'm like, yeah, but my dad is funny and he's not very serious. And so anyway, I used baseball and I used coach as kind of the theme. And once I started, I kind of had to end that way. And so I kind of took people through the journey using baseball and coaching as kind of the theme. And I found lots of great connections like Angels in the Outfield and the ninth inning stretch and strike 3 against cancer and extra innings that we have gotten with my dad. So it was fun.
I think it's so brilliant for a couple of reasons. One, you said it best. It emulated who he was. So it was it didn't feel like a departure from his personality, his character. I think that's so smart because people are very much invested in him and the version of him that they know, not the cancer patient. And I think something else that you did that was really just quite brilliant is, I'm sure you know this, most people, the idea of getting updates for a patient with pancreatic cancer, that's very scary. And I think the approach you took was so smart because it made it more approachable. It made it less scary to read what was to come. And there were a couple of bumps along the way. This wasn't always smooth sailing. And so I think what happens in a situation where you're finding a strong analogy and you're telling a story in an intriguing way, people are more likely to read, which means they're more likely to comment, which means that you're more likely to feel support because you've made the updates just compelling.
Right. That is, that's a good point. And I didn't do it on purpose to draw an audience, but the comments that we had both on the platform and outside the platform were like, oh my goodness, like Maggie's such a good storyteller. I can't wait to read another one. And when they would get the prompt that there's a new update or even a direct link from me or a link from my Instagram, then I don't think people were sitting there like, oh gosh, I'm going to read something really bad. Although it could have been, they, like you said, they genuinely like wanted to come and read it. And then I forgot to tell you, but we turned it into a book.
Yeah. Amazing.
But yeah.
Amazing. And I'm curious, who all from your family read the comments?
Well, so we had a group family chat. All the aunts, uncles, cousins, we called it Bear Strong. My dad's grandfather name is Bear. So the whole kind of theme with him was Bear Strong. And so I would always send a link to the Bear Strong group saying there's a new update. Obviously, if they had asked to get the email notifications, then they just were bombarded. But I liked that it also took them directly to the last post. Like they didn't navigate like, oh, now it's on whatever, on other platforms. You have to kind of scroll and figure out where you are. And this just takes you right there. But I don't know that my brothers necessarily were writing on this Support Now as much as like my dad's friends. Just because generationally, like my brothers, they're like, I'm trying to tell my dad.
I do think that comments and words of support, though, are so powerful. Sometimes when you're having a low moment, just not just the volume of people that are commenting, but just the types of comments can be very uplifting to show people that you're not alone. Never underestimate the power of leaving a positive comment on things like this. First of all, it costs no money to leave a comment.
Right.
It's a gesture of compassion. I may not be talking to you directly. I may not know everything, but I'm following along. I'm invested in your journey. And I think that those things really add up, especially in a cancer journey where there's so many ebbs and like the ebbs and the flows of the journey that he's on. Just to know that people are staying along for it is so helpful.
Well, you mentioned something about they might not know how to even say, I know what you're going through or here's some advice. what was really interesting is that the very last post that I wrote, my dad happened to be in town and I started reading the comments to him. And I wish I had recorded his face because obviously I would say a name and he would light up because he would know them. And then I'd say a name and I could kind of see his eyes cut. And then I would say, you don't know them. And then I would say, and I don't know them. And then I'd read the comment and it would say, I follow your story through Maggie on Instagram and I have been praying for you. And those comments were like, I don't want to say more touching, but like you can see the power of those comments where they took the time to say, I don't even know you. And I don't even know your daughter who's writing the updates, but I've been praying for you. And my mom always struggles. Like if you go to a wedding and you have to write in a guest book or like a baby shower, she'll look at me and she'll be like, what do I say? And I just have a way. I'm very creative and I can kind of think of something unique. My mom will look at me and she's like, I'm not going to write anything because I don't know what to say. You know what? You don't have to say a lot. It doesn't have to be some creative baseball analogy, but you can literally just write here for you, praying for you. That's all. Love you. I mean, it can be literally 2 words and still be just as impactful.
Completely. And I love that, the random acts of kindness that go so far to make someone feel like not only am I important, but that I'm seen and that this significant moment for me is being touched by others, I think is so wonderful. And again, words of support, I do think there's a tendency in older generations to not know what to say, so they say nothing. And I think what's very significant here is this idea of progress, not perfection. Just say something to make them aware that you care.
Right.
And that's led again by someone like yourself that's making this approachable for people. Like that's a skill. That's a skill that I think a lot of people, not everyone has, but when you have it, it's very, very meaningful because again, it's in our culture, we tend to see people flock to a family at the early stages of a diagnosis. And then very quickly after, people begin to retreat. And I think part of that is just natural. It's just an event and everyone, and then as life gets busy, people just go back to their lives. What you perfected though, Maggie, was this idea of I'm going to keep people informed so that we can keep that momentum.
I also let them kind of know when I was going to be posting again. So I wasn't posting every day when it wasn't necessary. And then I would kind of lead them like, on such and such a date, we're going to have this scan and I will, so they kind of knew. And that also eliminated like the outside of the platform, just random texts and phone calls, although they were welcomed, but like people didn't have to constantly be saying like, what's the latest? Because they kind of knew we were in a period of waiting and there wasn't no news sometimes is good news. The platform obviously offers way more than just the comments, which is what we keep, talking about, because my family, and just because of their age, like if they needed cash or casseroles, their friends were going to bring that without them asking, or me, using the features that are available to say, lend a hand, raise a hand. And all of that is like so amazing and helpful for certain people and their situations. And it would have been very helpful to me in another situation that I had in my personal life. But for this particular situation with my parents and their community, they were getting casseroles and they were getting gifts. I mean, people would send blankets because that's just what that generation does. So for them, it's interesting to see how it could be very useful for individuals' specific needs. And what they really needed was just those uplifting comments.
Again, I think there's just a lot of really great nuggets in here for people that find themselves in a similar position as an organizer, which is know your audience. You met people where they were. You knew that your parents' generation, they were going to do certain things a certain way, and you were respectful of that. And you also gave people a vehicle that may not be in that direct inner circle or may not be local to still be a part of the journey. And I think one of the other things you said, which I want to just say again, which is so smart, is telling people when you're going to post again to try to reduce the amount of texts and calls and conversations that you and your mom and everyone else had to have of What's the latest? Because one of the things we hear the most is it's so overwhelming for families to hear, what's the latest? How can I help? What can I do? In a time where you're just in an in-between stage. So almost by forecasting when that next update is, you don't eliminate it altogether, but you reduce a little bit of that noise that I've heard can be very exhausting to, kind of the first line of caregivers that are always thinking about it, but don't necessarily always want to feel like they have to be the messenger on these things, which is so smart. So again, just a lot of important nuggets here. And again, I see a lot of registries. I see a lot of people that use our updates feature, but there are very few that have used it so successfully. And while you may not recognize yourself that it was intentional, just in the way that you did it, I think has created such momentum and such power. Because to your point, not only are you keeping the people that care and love your family, you're also inviting new people into the mix that feel like they can deposit their support in a very easy way. I would love, and you touched on this earlier, for you to talk about your own experience. Part of where we have found a lot of synergy, Maggie, is, you obviously now know what it's like to be on the organizer side for your father. But you've also been through your own tough time. And I would love to spend a little bit of time talking on your experience and what support meant in that context.
So right before he was diagnosed, literally like 3 weeks before, my dad was visiting. My parents were visiting in my house in Birmingham. And it was, busy December season with all the things to do. They were in town to watch my little boy perform in this little performance. And my dad and my husband were up late. I was up late, mad at myself. I should have been in bed. And my to-do list was a mile long. And I had just laid down in bed, and I felt like the wind was slightly different than normal. I felt like the rain was slightly more sideways than normal. There was no forecast of bad weather, but I felt this weird pressure, and something in me was like, we might need to get the kids in the basement, which I've never in a million years in my whole life said or thought. And I walked out into the main room, looked at my dad and my husband on the sofa, and I said, something's going on. And they felt the same way. And I said, we need to get the kids. And the second I said that, it was just crash, boom, bang, and a tornado. Well, two brief tornadoes ripped right through our little community, and a 40,000-pound oak tree was on top of our house. And it was incredibly tragic, incredibly traumatic. We obviously all survived, which is the most important. But the days ahead after that were some of the most awful days I've ever been through in my life, trying to dig through rubble and salvage what was salvageable, not knowing when it was going to rain again, freezing cold temperatures. And it was the typical what you would think of in trauma like that. Thousands of text threads going in all different groups: the kindergarten group, this group, the first grade class, the Bible study class, the Bible study at church. And there were all these different subgroups texting. And so, for example, I couldn't get my cat out of the house, and I needed a cat carrier. If I had known about support now, I could have, whoever was helping me could have said, raise the hand, lend a hand. We need a cat carrier. And one cat, it's like, all the different platforms that moms are used to, Sign Up Genius, the meal train, all the different things, all streamlined into one. And unlike my parents who didn't need all that, I needed all that.
Yeah.
And it was like adding tornadoes on top of tornadoes, the amount of chaos, because it wasn't streamlined. And so instead of one person with one cat carrier showing up, 7 different people and 7 cat carriers showed up, which I was so touched and so thankful. But then it made me feel even more guilty and bad to have to tell them, oh, thank you so much, but I actually don't need you. And then I felt burdened that I didn't need to carry any extra weight, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And I think again, that speaks to my heart. And I think that I've learned this phrase from you, let people bless you with their blessings. One of the things that I've learned from experiences that you've shared is that so much about the heart of this company in general is like giving people a space to do that, but doing so in a way that's responsible and doesn't add to the overwhelm. Because what you're saying here is it's not that there wasn't an abundance of support. There was, but there's a lack of organization. There's a lack of structure. And as moms, and I think this is super important to say again, Maggie has 3 children, 3 little boys whose lives needed to progress despite this very traumatic experience. So you are juggling not just trying to get your house and your belongings together on top of insurance and everything, but you're also trying to provide a sense of normalcy to your boys. And that's where, the lend a hand and all the things that we try to do is in an effort to provide a bit of consistency. And so, I know we've talked about this, how I wish we were there for you too in that moment. And
We obviously made it through, but you said it exactly right. It just was more disorganized and chaotic than it could have been had we have known something like Support Now was available.
yeah,
I can't tell you how many people I have a little girl in my kid's class was just diagnosed like last week with she found a cancerous tumor. Everybody has the same thought. Oh, this is horrible. I want to help. What can I do? What can I do? It's everyone's just natural human first thing. And like you said, everyone does that and then kind of dissipates. Well, I didn't know what else to do other than to offer one thing that I knew nobody else would. And that was the first person I could tell was kind of the organizer by default. I contacted her and I said, have you heard of Support Now? This is what you need to do. Because they have 3 kids. It's the same season I was in right before Christmas. Not that there's ever a good time to have a diagnosis, but especially right before, holidays, it can make it even more challenging. But that's what I need to do. And I felt so good when I could say, this is something that's out there and this will help.
thank you. Well, Maggie, let me ask you this as we begin to kind of like wrap up. Both these experiences with the tornado and your dad, I mean, it sounds like both have shaped you and shaped the way that you look at support. Although my guess is, and talking to you, you're kind of like a natural leader in this capacity. But how have both of these experiences shaped the way that you show up for people?
We touched on it a little bit before, but you'll see something on Facebook or Instagram and you're like, yeah, I haven't talked to that person since middle school. Like we just happen to still be Facebook friends, but I don't need to write something on there. I mean, there's all these other comments. Do it. Like you said, it's free. It takes 1 second. You can write 2 words, literally love you. And that will mean more than any meal you could send. And it doesn't go unnoticed. It does not go unnoticed. Another thing that I learned is I was just raised very, I guess, traditional that like you write a handwritten thank you card. And I had a notes section on my phone after the tornado, and I did it for my mom after my dad. It's overwhelming the amount of handwritten thank you notes for both events that were back to back that we would have to write. It wouldn't happen. And so I found a creative way through my Christmas card I sent to like do a thank you note. But the manners guru here in our town that does little etiquette classes for the kids, she told me, and there are situations where a thanks is not necessary. People aren't giving because they need to receive generally. Like they don't need a thank you. They're doing it out of the goodness of their heart so I just view it differently from going through both of those things. Like I'm going to be a giver and it might look different. It might be financially. It might be literally dropping off a meal. It might be offering to dog sit. I need a dog sitter. And everyone thinks about cash and meals, and they are very important. But there are so many things, like you mentioned, childcare. The people that were picking up my kids from school and taking them home with them and then feeding them dinner, that was invaluable to me, just having those extra few windows where I could still dig through the rubble or things like that. So I will always be a giver. And like I said, it will be different depending on the situation of how I feel led to give.
Again, I think those are all great pieces of advice. And the first one that you said, I think is important to reinforce. Despite how long it's been since you've talked to someone or the closeness of your relationship in your eyes or in their eyes, those things don't go unnoticed. I think that piece of advice is so significant, so important, because when people are going through something really, really tough, they want to know that people care. And showing care can look a lot of different ways. And it does reflect incredibly well on you to show up in a time that they'll always remember. And I always say that people remember the times that you showed up when things weren't going well more than they do when things are going well. Like, let's say it's a baby or a wedding. it's easy to show up in those times. It's much, much harder, but much more meaningful when you show up in the times that are a lot more challenging to kind of to face.
And my aunt always says, "You walk to a wedding, you run to a funeral." And it's just always kind of like stood out in my mind. Like people do normally walk to weddings, but they're running to funerals because a funeral also, it's like you're not prepared for it. It's not like you don't necessarily know when it's coming. So you're having to drop things and run. A wedding, sometimes a year in advance. You get to save the date, you get all the things. And people are going to remember who ran to them when they're in need.
That's right. Well, we'll end on that note, Maggie. Thank you again so much for opening up and sharing more about your amazing dad, your own experience. I'm so glad that everything ended up, you're on the other side, so to speak, although the trauma will always kind of live within you. And you've turned that into a positive. And Mike, I always say to moms on this, it's such a beautiful example of leadership to also display to your boys because they're watching. They're watching how you lead with your dad, and what a beautiful example that is of showing up, and on the house and the tornado, showing up how to be resilient and push forward despite the circumstances. And I think that's such an incredible gift to give your children is to really emulate the behaviors that you would want them to do and possess in a time that really has no playbook. And I know even for myself, I've learned so much by following Bobby's registry and how you have really just created so much momentum and so much strength. And I would like to believe in large part the outcome that he achieved is because of the support and the community around him. And you did that.
Definitely. Well, I didn't do it. I believe that somebody much, much higher did all of this before me. But I did help organize the communication, and it was fun. It was fun. It was a lot of pressure to keep up with the baseball analogy, and I was glad that those innings were over because I was about to have to switch to a new sport, which he'd be fine with because he played football in college. But baseball, I was running out of baseball things.
I love it. Well, thank you, Maggie. And just as a quick aside for anyone listening that finds themselves in a similar situation, we encourage you to check out supportnow.org for a chance to build a free support registry. And like Maggie alluded to, you can use it in all the ways. It's totally customizable. And we love, love, love being a reliable platform that makes it easy in the most uneasy of times. So thank you, Maggie.
Thank you
Appreciate
all
it.
so much. Bye.